Britain's milk industry is hiding something, and not in small print, not buried in a report nobody reads. Right there on the shelf, in the bottle you bought this morning, in the cup of tea you made without thinking twice. I spent weeks investigating every major milk brand sold in UK supermarkets. What I found changed how I'll shop for the rest of my life. 10 brands, only 3 are safe. Let's start with the one that's been lying to your face for years. Brand 1, Müller Fresh Milk. Müller looks like the premium choice. The branding is clean, the bottles look serious, and the name carries enough weight that most shoppers reach for it without a second thought. Here is what Müller doesn't put on the label. In April 2025, their processing facility broke down. Not for a day, for 12 straight days. Over 100 British dairy farmers were forced to dump thousands of litres of perfectly good fresh milk directly down the drain. Milk that cows had produced, milk that farmers had collected. Gone. Because Müller couldn't fix their own factory and had no backup plan in place to process it elsewhere. Müller eventually pledged full compensation, but farmers reported being left without answers for days about when collections would resume or whether they'd be paid at all. The communication was, by most accounts, an afterthought. The milk was gone. The system moved on. That factory breakdown didn't happen in isolation. It exposed something structural about how Müller operates. They source from thousands of farms across the UK, blending milk together in enormous batches until any trace of individual farm identity is completely gone. You cannot know which farm your Müller milk came from. You cannot know what those cows were fed, whether they spent time outdoors, or what welfare standards applied to them specifically. Everything gets pulled into the same tanker regardless. The cows supplying Müller's network are predominantly Holstein Friesians, a breed engineered for maximum output, not milk quality. High volume, lower butterfat, lower protein. These animals spend significant time indoors on grain-heavy diets, and the milk reflects that. Flat, thin, lacking the natural richness that comes from animals grazing on actual pasture. Then there's the pricing. Müller pays farmers between 33 and 35 pence per litre. The actual cost of producing that milk is closer to 37 to 40 pence. Every litre a farmer sells to Müller is a litre sold at a loss. Farmers stay in the contract not because it works for them, but because Müller controls enough of the market that there is nowhere else to go. That is not a partnership. That is a captive supplier being squeezed by a processor that knows it holds all the leverage. And then there's the environmental record. Müller has faced sustained criticism over its expansion strategy, the conditions it imposes on farmers, and its track record of absorbing smaller dairies while the problems multiply. Bigger, less accountable, and always moving on. The branding communicates quality. The ownership structure communicates something entirely different. The next brand spent decades building a reputation for freshness. The filtration process they're most famous for tells a different story. Brand 2, Cravendale Filtered Fresh Milk. Cravendale charges nearly double the price of standard milk. The pitch is simple. Ceramic filtration removes impurities, the milk stays fresher longer, and you're getting something purer than the standard product. Every part of that pitch deserves scrutiny. The filtration process does remove bacteria, all of them. The harmful ones, yes, but also the beneficial bacteria that naturally occur in fresh milk and support digestion. What comes out of the ceramic filter is sterile, biologically inert. A liquid that can sit unopened in your fridge for 3 weeks, not because it's exceptionally fresh, but because there is nothing alive left in it to cause it to sour. Real fresh milk spoils within days. That is not a flaw. That is what living food does when its natural organisms complete their cycle. Cravendale doesn't behave like fresh milk because it isn't fresh milk in any meaningful biological sense. It is ultra-processed milk in premium packaging. The taste reflects the processing. There is an artificial sweetness to Cravendale that people frequently mistake for creaminess. It is not the richness of quality milk. It is the result of filtration concentrating certain sugars while stripping out other compounds. Processed sweetness dressed up as dairy quality. Here is what Cravendale doesn't tell you on the label. The source milk behind that premium packaging is not organic. It does not come from pasture-fed cows. It comes from the same intensive farming networks that supply budget own-brand milk. The only difference between Cravendale and a budget white label carton is the extra processing steps Arla adds before bottling. Arla owns Cravendale. Arla is a Danish-Swedish multinational dairy cooperative that dominates the UK milk supply. They supply supermarkets, produce branded products, and run one of the largest processing operations in Europe. And in late 2024, Arla partnered with Tesco, Morrisons, and Aldi to trial a chemical feed additive called Bovaer on 30 of their farms. Bovaer suppresses an enzyme in a cow's digestive system to reduce methane from burps. The goal was hitting corporate sustainability targets. They didn't tell consumers. No labels, no warnings, no opt-out. Shoppers buying Cravendale, Tesco, Own Brand and Aldi milk were unknowingly part of a feeding experiment with a drug they'd never heard of and never consented to. The trial ended in November 2025 after a public backlash. The milk from those farms is gone from shelves. But the company that ran that trial without asking you is still the company making Cravendale. The premium price didn't buy you transparency. It bought you more processing from the same company that treated your consent as optional. The next brand is the biggest supermarket in Britain. Their milk tells you exactly what happens when scale becomes the only priority. Brand 3. Tesco Own Brand Fresh Milk. Tesco is Britain's largest supermarket. Their own brand milk is Britain's most purchased milk, and it is a near-perfect example of what happens when volume replaces quality as the organizing principle of an entire supply chain. Tesco sources from multiple processors, primarily Arla and Müller, which means their milk runs through the same industrial networks I've already described. Thousands of farms blended into anonymous batches, Holstein Friesians on grain-heavy indoor diets, aggressive pasteurization and homogenization designed to make every bottle look identical regardless of what the underlying milk quality actually was. What makes Tesco particularly striking is the illusion of choice. Everyday value, standard, finest. 3 price points, 3 different labels, a clear implication that you are selecting different quality tiers. A former Tesco employee confirmed that finest and standard milk would sometimes arrive in the same delivery, sourced from identical supply chains. The only difference was the label and the price. You were not buying better farming, you were buying better packaging. Tesco was also directly involved in the Arla Bovaer trial. They partnered with Arla to test the feed additive on farms supplying their stores, and they did it without informing the customers buying that milk. The trial ended in November 2025. Current Tesco milk is Bovaer free, but a retailer that allowed a secret feeding trial in its supply chain and only stopped after public pressure is a retailer that chose corporate partnership over the people it sells to every single day. Tesco positions itself as a trusted household name. Generations of British families have shopped there. But trust requires honesty. And what Tesco demonstrated with the Bovaer trial is that honesty becomes negotiable when the right corporate partner comes through the door. The next brand markets itself as the budget choice. The corners it cuts cost more than the penny you save. Brand 4. Morrisons Savers Milk. Morrisons Savers is the clearest example of what budget milk actually means in practice. Not just a lower price, the lowest cost suppliers, the thinnest margins, and the least transparency about where your milk comes from. This range is sourced from the bottom end of the supply chain. Milk from multiple farms, sometimes multiple countries, blended together before bottling. Any meaningful detail about the source disappears at that point. The cows, the diet, the welfare standards, all of it averaged out into a uniform white liquid optimized for price per unit, not for the person drinking it. The processing that follows is aggressive. Ultra-high heat treatments to extend shelf life, heavy homogenization to make every bottle look identical despite the blended source material, long storage before distribution. By the time Savers milk reaches a Morrisons shelf, it can be close to a week old, and the proteins show the stress of that journey. Add it to hot tea and it separates quickly, a visible sign that the fat structure has been compromised both by the cow's grain diet and by the industrial processing applied on top of it. Morrisons was also caught running a fake farm name scandal. They marketed products under names like Hemsley's, small, traceable-sounding names designed to give budget products the emotional warmth of artisan sourcing. When customers investigated, those farms either didn't exist or had no connection to the actual supply chain. After 70% of surveyed consumers objected, Morrisons quietly dropped the names. The instinct to manufacture a story rather than improve the product tells you everything about where the priorities sit. The next brand has been on British breakfast tables for generations. The name implies something wholesome. The supply chain it sits inside does not. Brand 5, Asda Own Brand fresh milk. Asda's own brand milk follows a pattern that should be familiar by now. Low shelf price, shifting supplier contracts based purely on cost. No meaningful traceability. Milk sourced from across the UK and Europe, blended at scale, processed aggressively to make variable quality raw material look consistent in the bottle. When the source milk quality is inconsistent, as it inevitably is when you're pulling from dozens of different farms on rotating contracts, you compensate with processing. Stronger homogenization, higher heat, chemical stabilizers, and even then, quality varies. Some batches taste acceptable, others carry an off note, slightly sour, slightly flat because the raw material wasn't consistent enough to fix entirely. Smart price may be the cheapest option in the dairy aisle, but cheap milk always has a story, and understanding that story makes the low price make considerably more sense than the milk itself. The next brand sits in a green bottle and promises organic credentials. What Arla's ownership means for those credentials is worth understanding before you pay the premium. Brand 6. Yeo Valley Milk. Yeo Valley is one of the most trusted names in British food. The branding is genuinely appealing. Somerset Farm, organic certification, an identity built entirely around doing dairy differently. It is the brand that health-conscious shoppers and organic buyers reach for when they want to feel confident about what they're buying. Here is what changed in 2018 and what most Yeo Valley customers still don't know. Yeo Valley's milk, butter and cream have been produced by Arla under license since 2018. The branding stayed, the Somerset identity stayed, the organic certification stayed. What changed was the supply chain behind it. Arla now makes the milk that goes into Yeo Valley bottles, running it through the same industrial processing infrastructure they apply to every other product in their portfolio. The yogurt is different. Yeo Valley yogurt is still made at their own farm in Somerset and is genuinely worth buying. But the milk in the green bottle is Arla milk with a Yeo Valley label. And when you pay the premium for Yeo Valley milk specifically because you believe you are buying outside the industrial system, you deserve to know that the industrial system is exactly what you're buying into. Organic certification guarantees certain things. No synthetic pesticides in the feed, minimum outdoor grazing time, no routine antibiotics. Those standards are real and they matter. What certification does not guarantee is that the company processing your milk shares the values the branding implies. The next brand is the one most people never question. The glass bottle is doing a lot of work that the supply chain behind it sometimes doesn't deserve. Brand 7. Milk and More Doorstep Delivery. Milk and More sells something more powerful than milk. It sells memories. The glass bottle on the doorstep. The early morning delivery. The ritual that connects modern households to something that felt simpler and more honest about where food comes from. That nostalgia is real, and some of it is genuinely earned. Glass bottles are better for the environment than plastic when they're properly reused. Doorstep delivery reduces individual car journeys to supermarkets. These things matter, but the nostalgia in the packaging does not automatically mean quality in the bottle. Milk and More sources from multiple suppliers, and those suppliers vary significantly by region. In some areas, your delivery comes from a small local dairy with strong welfare standards and genuine traceability. In others, the milk in that glass bottle is sourced from Arla or Muller, the same processes I've spent this entire video documenting, simply decanted into glass rather than plastic. The glass bottle does not change what's inside it. Arla milk in a glass bottle is still Arla milk. If you want to use Milk and More, you can, but you need to do the research. Find out which specific dairy supplies your area. Look into that dairy's sourcing, their farming standards, their processing approach. If it's a genuine local dairy doing things properly, the nostalgia and the quality actually align. If it's a major industrial processor in a glass bottle, you're paying more for the same milk and the feeling of doing something different. The problem isn't the delivery model. The problem is assuming the packaging tells the full story. There are 3 brands that don't require any of those caveats. 3 options where the ingredient integrity, the farming standards, and the transparency actually hold up. Let's get to them. Safe pick 1. Waitrose Duchy Organic. Whole milk. This is the clearest example of what supermarket milk can be when the standards are set properly and enforced consistently. Duchy Organic carries Soil Association certification, which is the most rigorous organic standard available in Britain. That certification guarantees a minimum of 200 outdoor grazing days per year. Organic grass feed, no routine antibiotics, no synthetic pesticides in anything the cows eat. These are not marketing claims, they are audited commitments with real consequences for non-compliance. The milk is unhomogenized. The cream rises to the top exactly as it did when milk arrived in glass bottles on your doorstep 50 years ago. You shake it before you pour. That small act is the most honest thing about it. It tells you the fat hasn't been mechanically beaten into permanent suspension, that nothing artificial has been done to the structure of the milk in the name of visual consistency. Waitrose sources this milk from 9 dedicated farms in the West Country. 9 farms, named, traceable, consistent. Not a blended anonymous batch from hundreds of suppliers rotating on quarterly contracts. The same farms, the same standards, the same milk. It costs more than budget own brand. What you're paying for is not a marketing tier, it's the actual cost of farming done properly. Cows outdoors, welfare standards that exceed legal minimums, processing that respects the milk rather than engineering it into submission. Taste it next to a budget carton and the difference is immediate. Richer, creamier, a natural sweetness that comes from grass, not from processing. This is what milk is supposed to taste like. Safe Pick 2, Jersey Gold Top. Graham's has been family-owned since 1939, Scotland's largest independent dairy, not owned by Arla, not owned by Muller, not owned by a multinational cooperative answering to shareholders in Copenhagen or Munich. A Scottish family business that has spent 85 years building a reputation it cannot afford to compromise. That independence matters more than any certification because it changes the incentive structure entirely. When the people making decisions about ingredients and farming standards are the same people whose name is on the bottle, cutting corners carries a different kind of cost. The Jersey Gold Top range is made from milk from Jersey cows, a heritage breed that produces naturally richer milk with higher butterfat and higher protein than the Holstein Friesians that dominate industrial dairy herds. Jersey cows also produce predominantly A2 protein, which a significant number of people find easier to digest than the A1 protein common in standard supermarket milk. The milk is unhomogenized. Cream on top. Graham's works directly with 100 specifically selected Scottish farms, pays its farmers fairly, and maintains genuine supply chain traceability. Graham's has publicly confirmed that none of their farming partners use Bovaer or any comparable feed additive. They stayed completely clear of the Arla trials. That decision was a choice, and it tells you where their priorities sit when corporate sustainability targets pull in one direction and consumer trust pulls in the other. Available in Morrison's, selected Sainsbury's stores, and across Scotland. Not the cheapest option, the right option. Safe Pick 3, Organic Herd Cooperative Milk. The structure of this one is the point. Organic Herd is a farmer-owned cooperative of 300 organic farms across the UK. The farmers don't sell to a processor. They are the cooperative. They set the standards. They control the supply chain. They determine what goes into the milk and what doesn't. Organic Herd pays its farmers between 49 and 56 pence per litre. Muller pays 33 to 35 pence per litre. That gap is not charity. It is the actual difference between what it costs to produce high-quality organic milk from well-managed farms and what an industrial processor will pay when it holds enough market power to set the price unilaterally. Full organic certification across all 300 farms, minimum outdoor grazing, no routine antibiotics, no synthetic pesticides, no Bovaer, no feed trials run without farmer consent, let alone consumer consent, because the farmers are the owners and they would never agree to it. When you buy organic herd milk, you are not funding a multinational processor's shareholder returns. You are paying directly into a cooperative where the money flows back to the farms producing the milk. That is a fundamentally different economic relationship, and it produces a fundamentally different product, available in selected retailers and farm shops. Worth seeking out specifically because the ownership model is the strongest quality guarantee available, not a brand promise, not a certification alone. Farmers who own the outcome. 10 minutes ago, you picked up a bottle of milk without thinking about it. I understand that. Milk is the most ordinary thing in a British kitchen. It has always just been there, but the safe picks exist. They're accessible. Some of them are in the same supermarket aisle as the brands I've told you to avoid. If this changed how you'll shop tomorrow, subscribe. There is a lot more in that fridge that deserves the same scrutiny.